Lucas Miller was a 19-year-old with ambitions that often seemed too big for his reality to hold. Since he'd lost his parents in a tragic car accident, he'd lived with his aunt, Anne, who had raised him in their modest apartment. Anne was more than family. She was the sole anchor he had, the only person who made him feel grounded in a world that often felt like it was slipping through his fingers. When he wasn't working long hours delivering pizzas, he spent time teaching himself programming, dreaming of a future where he could design apps to make people's lives easier. It was his way out, his dream of independence, and though Anne never said it, he knew she believed in him. Late that night, as Lucas was finally wrapping up a long shift, fatigue tugged at him as he pushed his bike through the dimly lit streets. His mind drifted between thoughts of coding projects and worries about saving enough for college when a faint, stifled cry snapped him out of his reverie. He paused, uncertain. The sound was unmistakably close, a soft, muffled sob somewhere in the direction of the park just off his route. Curiosity, mixed with an impulse he couldn't quite name, led him to follow the sound. As he entered the park, he noticed a small figure sitting alone on a bench, his knees pulled up to his chest, shoulders shaking with silent tears. The boy looked to be only about 5, and in the faint glow of the streetlight, he seemed small, almost swallowed up by the night around him. Lucas approached slowly, crouching down a few feet away to avoid scaring the boy. "Hey there," he said gently, his voice calm. "Are you all right?" The boy looked up, his face streaked with tears, wide eyes staring at Lucas, a mixture of relief and fear crossing his face. I got lost," he whispered, his voice catching on a sob. I can't find my parents." The vulnerability in the boy's voice struck something deep in Lucas. He leaned in closer, keeping his tone soft, trying to reassure him. "It's okay. I'll help you find them," Lucas said firmly. "What's your name?" "Ethan," the boy stammered, sniffing, his tiny fists clutching the edge of his shorts tightly. I don't know where they went." Lucas gave him a reassuring nod. "Well, Ethan, let's figure this out together. Are you hurt?" Ethan shook his head, and Lucas felt a brief wave of relief. He checked his phone, only to realize he had no signal. Frustration simmered for a second, but he didn't let it show on his face. "All right, looks like my phone's not working here," Lucas said, keeping his tone light. "But no problem. How about we take a walk over to the police station? It's not too far from here, and they can help us get in touch with your parents." Ethan glanced up at him, eyes wide. "Really? You'll stay with me?" Lucas nodded. "I'll stay with you the whole way." As they began walking, Ethan's small hand slipped into Lucas's, holding on tightly. Lucas could feel how much the boy needed someone to trust in that moment. He held Ethan's hand firmly, giving it a gentle squeeze to reassure him. They walked in silence for a few minutes, but soon Lucas could sense Ethan's nervousness melting just a little. "Were you at the park with your parents, Ethan?" he asked, trying to keep Ethan talking to distract him. "Yeah," Ethan murmured. I saw a dog. He was so fluffy, and I wanted to pet him. But then when I turned around, they were gone. I looked and looked, but," his voice trailed off, sadness thickening his words. Lucas nodded, listening intently. "It must have been a really fluffy dog for you to get that distracted, huh?" A small smile broke through Ethan's worried expression. "He was so cute," he said, almost shyly. Lucas chuckled softly. "I get it. Dogs are pretty hard to ignore. You know, I have a hard time resisting them too. So you're not alone there." Ethan gave a tiny laugh, and Lucas could see the tension in his small shoulders begin to ease. They continued walking, with Lucas occasionally asking him questions about his favorite toys and what kind of games he liked to play. For a moment, Ethan's eyes brightened as he spoke about his favorite action figures, giving Lucas a glimpse of the joyful, playful boy hidden beneath the fear. When they finally reached the police station, Lucas guided Ethan to the front desk, gently letting go of his hand as they approached the officers. A tall officer with a warm, kind face looked down at Ethan and then at Lucas with an understanding nod. "Looks like you helped someone out tonight," the officer said, glancing at Lucas with a smile. "Just glad he's safe," Lucas replied, patting Ethan on the shoulder reassuringly. The officer crouched down to Ethan's level, his voice soft but confident. "Hey, buddy. We're going to help you find your parents, all right?" Ethan nodded, looking back at Lucas one last time. "Will you stay here too?" Lucas smiled, ruffling Ethan's hair. "I'll be here as long as you need me, Ethan." One of the other officers approached Lucas and shook his hand. "Young man, what you did tonight shows a lot of character. You really helped this little guy." Lucas shrugged modestly, not entirely comfortable with the attention. "I just did what anyone would have done," he said, his tone genuine. He watched as Ethan was gently guided by the officers into the station, feeling a strange sense of satisfaction. For the first time in a while, he felt he'd truly made a difference. Little did he know, that single act of kindness would soon set off a chain of events that would change his life in ways he couldn't yet imagine. The next morning, as Lucas was prepping pizzas in the back of the restaurant, his phone buzzed unexpectedly in his pocket. Normally, he'd ignore it during his shift, but something told him to check. The number was unknown, yet he felt a strange pull to answer. "Hello?" Lucas said, a hint of hesitation in his voice.
Lucas Miller.
A calm, authoritative voice asked. "Yes, this is Lucas. This is William Parker. You helped my son Ethan last night." There was a short pause, as if the man wanted to choose his words carefully. "I'd like to thank you personally, if you're available." Lucas's heart skipped a beat. He knew exactly who William Parker was, the CEO of Parker Tech, a household name in the technology world. He felt a mix of curiosity and anxiety flutter in his chest. Yes, of course," Lucas replied, trying to keep his voice steady. "When and where?" They arranged to meet that afternoon at a nearby coffee shop. After work, Lucas quickly changed, took a deep breath, and made his way to the cafe. As he entered, he scanned the room, and his eyes landed on a man sitting at a corner table, a tall figure with sharp features and an unmistakable air of confidence. William Parker looked up and gave Lucas a welcoming nod. "Lucas," William said warmly, rising to extend his hand. "Thank you so much for helping Ethan last night. I can't tell you how much it means to us." Lucas shook his hand, feeling slightly starstruck. "It was no problem, Mr. Parker. I'm just glad he's safe." William studied him for a moment, his eyes narrowing slightly, as though seeing something in Lucas that he hadn't expected. "Ethan told us about how kind you were," William said, smiling. "He hasn't stopped talking about you, actually. We don't get to see him light up like that very often." Lucas felt his face warm with a mix of surprise and pride. He hadn't expected such praise, especially not from someone like William Parker. "He's a great kid," Lucas replied, genuinely. "I was just at the right place at the right time." They talked for a while, Lucas cautiously but naturally. William asked about his job, his plans for the future, and Lucas found himself sharing more than he'd expected about his ambitions to study programming. He even mentioned his struggles to balance work and save up for college. William listened intently, nodding thoughtfully as Lucas spoke. There was something kind and almost fatherly in his demeanor, something Lucas hadn't felt in a long time. "Well, I think your goals are admirable," William said finally, leaning back with a thoughtful expression. "In fact, I'd like to invite you over for dinner tonight, if you're free. My wife Catherine would love to meet the young man who helped our son, and Ethan would be thrilled." Lucas hesitated. A dinner invitation from one of the wealthiest men in the city was beyond anything he'd imagined that morning. But there was also something compelling in William's gaze, a sincerity that made him feel at ease. Sure, Mr. Parker," Lucas replied, nodding slowly. "I'd be honored." "Please call me William," he said, smiling. "We'll see you tonight, then." Later that evening, Lucas made his way to the address William had given him. As he approached, he found himself standing in front of an imposing mansion, its lights casting a warm glow over the sprawling front lawn. Taking a steadying breath, he walked up to the door, where a housekeeper welcomed him with a polite nod. Lucas stepped into the grand entryway, his eyes widening as he took in the opulent surroundings. High ceilings, polished marble floors, and elegant decor filled the room with an almost overwhelming sense of luxury. Before he had time to take in much more, he heard a small voice call out excitedly, "Lucas!" Ethan came barreling down the hallway, his face lighting up as he spotted Lucas. Without hesitation, he threw his arms around Lucas's waist, grinning from ear to ear. "You're here." Ethan beamed, his eyes bright with excitement. "I told Mom and Dad that you'd come." Lucas smiled, touched by the warmth of Ethan's welcome. "Of course, buddy. I wouldn't miss it." At that moment, William and a graceful woman appeared in the doorway, smiling as they watched the reunion. William placed a gentle hand on the woman's shoulder. "Lucas, this is my wife Catherine," William introduced. And our daughter, Sophia. Catherine stepped forward, her smile kind but observant. It's wonderful to meet you, Lucas. Thank you again for what you did for Ethan. Lucas smiled, feeling slightly out of place yet deeply welcomed. It's a pleasure to meet you, Mrs. Parker. And really, it was no trouble at all. Sophia, a teenager with a quiet, artistic air, nodded at him, a polite but reserved smile on her face. Ethan hasn't stopped talking about you since last night, she said with a small laugh. The group moved to the dining room, where the table was beautifully set with fine china and silverware. Lucas couldn't help but feel a bit nervous, acutely aware of how different his usual dinners were compared to this scene. As they settled in, Catherine looked at Lucas with a warm curiosity. So Lucas, William tells us you're interested in studying programming? Yes, ma'am, he said, nodding. I've always been interested in technology, and I'm hoping to go to college for it someday. William gave Lucas an encouraging look. Lucas has a great drive. He's working hard to save up for college, balancing his job and studying on his own. It's impressive. Catherine's expression softened as she exchanged a look with William. You know, we have a program for young people with that kind of determination. We'd love to help you pursue those goals. Lucas's eyes widened in surprise, his mind racing. That would be amazing. But why? Catherine looked at him, her gaze sympathetic but steady. Because we believe in helping those who show kindness and character, and you've done both. There was a pause, a beat of silence that felt as though the room itself was holding its breath. William leaned forward, his gaze growing serious. Lucas, William began, there's something else. I'm not sure how to say this, but there's a reason we wanted to meet you. Lucas felt his pulse quicken, sensing the weight behind William's words. I've done some searching recently, William continued, choosing his words carefully. A long time ago, I had a relationship before Catherine and I married. I recently learned that the woman had a child. Lucas felt his stomach drop, his eyes searching William's face as the pieces slowly started to fall into place. You think, he started, struggling to form the words. We believe, Catherine interjected gently, that you may be that child. The revelation hung in the air, settling over them like a heavy fog. Lucas's mind raced, fragments of his childhood memories mingling with the shock of this moment. The sense of belonging he'd felt, the connection with Ethan, it all began to take on a different light. I don't know what to say, Lucas whispered, his voice barely audible. William reached across the table, his hand extended in a gesture of understanding. You don't have to say anything, Lucas. But if you're open to it, I'd like to know for sure. I'd like you to be part of our family. Lucas sat there, stunned, barely able to process the gravity of what William was suggesting. As they sat around the dinner table, Lucas couldn't shake a growing sense of connection with the Parkers, something that felt oddly natural yet disorienting. It wasn't just the warmth of their home or the comfortable flow of conversation. It was as if he'd known them in some distant way, long before this moment. William, with a steady, discerning gaze, seemed to sense Lucas's inner world, and leaned forward, his interest deep and genuine. So Lucas, tell me more about your dreams. What is it you're hoping to do with programming? Lucas hesitated, glancing around the table. Catherine and Sophia looked at him with encouraging eyes, and Ethan beamed, still thrilled by his presence. Well, Lucas began, finding himself relaxing under their attention, I want to work in technology, specifically programming. I've always liked solving problems and thinking about ways to improve things. He paused, smiling slightly as he thought about his future. But for now, I'm saving up to afford college. It's been slow, but it's something I'm working hard toward. Catherine exchanged a look with William, her expression unreadable at first. She leaned forward, folding her hands on the table, her voice both gentle and inviting. You know, Lucas, we have a scholarship fund for young people with your determination. I think it would be wonderful to have someone like you benefit from it. Lucas blinked, his mind struggling to keep up. A scholarship? From the Parkers? That would be amazing, he said, heart pounding as he took in Catherine's words. But why would you do that for me? William cleared his throat, looking at Catherine before shifting his gaze to Lucas. There was something intense in his expression, a mix of nervousness and anticipation, as if he'd been preparing for this conversation. Lucas, William began, speaking slowly, there's more to it. I've been wanting to talk to you about something important. Lucas straightened, curiosity deepening. William took a steadying breath, his gaze unwavering. Years ago, before I married Catherine, I was in a relationship that ended unexpectedly. We parted ways, and I lost all contact with her. Recently, though, I learned she had a child shortly after we lost touch. He paused, letting the weight of his words settle. That child, from what I've been able to find out, could be you. Lucas felt his world tilt, his mind struggling to process what William was saying. He looked from William to Catherine, feeling a strange mixture of disbelief, confusion, and something else he couldn't yet name. "You're saying," Lucas's voice faltered as he tried to understand. "You think I'm your son?" "Yes," William replied, his voice calm but filled with emotion. "I didn't know you existed until recently. I've been trying to find out more, and the more I learned, the more certain I became. When I heard about what you did for Ethan, it was more than coincidence. I had to meet you." Lucas's mind was racing. He looked down, feeling his hands shake slightly. "But how could this be? My aunt, and she raised me. She never mentioned anything like this." Catherine leaned in gently, her voice warm and reassuring. "I can't imagine how overwhelming this must be, Lucas. None of this is meant to disrupt your life, but William and we believe you deserve to know the truth." Lucas nodded slowly, his thoughts tangled. Part of him felt a deep instinctive pull to these people, as if a hidden piece of his identity was suddenly unexpectedly visible. And yet, he felt the weight of loyalty to his aunt, the woman who had sacrificed so much to raise him, who had given him everything when he had no one else. "I don't know what to think," Lucas murmured, his voice barely above a whisper. William leaned forward, his eyes filled with an intensity that Lucas had rarely seen in anyone. "Lucas, we don't want to rush you into anything. But if you're willing, I'd like to take a DNA test, just to know for sure." Lucas felt the ground beneath him shift, but despite the storm of emotions, he found himself nodding, his voice steady as he replied, "Yes. I think I need to know too." Lucas couldn't shake the sense of confusion and anticipation that had been gnawing at him since dinner with the Parkers. The revelation from William left his mind tangled in questions only one person could answer. With a nervous resolve, he made his way to his aunt and small apartment. Steeling himself, he entered, searching for the right way to approach her, and was sitting at the small kitchen table, sipping her evening tea. She looked up, her face breaking into a smile as she saw him, but Lucas felt his own expression falter. Anne's smile faded, noticing his unease. "Lucas? You look troubled," she said softly, setting her cup down and giving him her full attention. He took a breath, feeling his pulse quicken. "I need to ask you something, and I need you to be honest with me, Aunt Anne." Anne's face grew concerned, her fingers tightening around her cup. "Of course, Lucas. What is it?" Lucas swallowed hard, his voice trembling as he spoke. "Do you know a man named William Parker?" At the sound of the name, Anne's face drained of color. Her hands stilled, and she seemed momentarily lost, as if time had rewound itself. Slowly, she set her cup down and sank into her chair, looking up at him with a heaviness he hadn't seen before. "William Parker," she murmured, her voice almost a whisper, as if saying his name carried a weight of its own. She looked away, gathering her thoughts, and finally met Lucas's eyes. "Lucas," she began, her voice steady but tinged with sadness. "There's something I've kept from you, a part of your past. It was to protect you, but maybe it's time you knew." He watched her intently, sensing she was holding back. "And," he urged gently, "why didn't you ever tell me about my biological parents? All my life, I thought you and Uncle Rob were the only family I had after Mom and Dad passed." He paused, feeling a knot in his throat. "But that's not the whole story, is it?" And took a deep breath, the faintest tremble in her hands as she finally spoke. "Lucas, your mother. Her name was Elizabeth. She was my younger sister. She had you when she was very young, and I helped raise you. But Elizabeth was involved with someone, a man who came from a world very different from ours. That man was William Parker." Lucas felt his stomach drop. Hearing her say it, with that look of sadness, made it real in a way that William's words hadn't. "And you never told me," he said, barely above a whisper. And nodded, her expression filled with regret. "I wanted to shield you from that world. William Parker, he was wealthy, successful, and in love with your mother at the time. But life with him wasn't simple. There was pressure, expectation, and Elizabeth, she couldn't bear the burden. She hesitated, clearly pained by the memories. After you were born, things between them grew difficult. She was young, and the pressures of that life weighed heavily on her. When Elizabeth passed, I couldn't let them pull you into that world, with all its complications. So I raised you like my own, hoping you'd never have to know. Lucas sat back, absorbing the enormity of her words. So all this time, you thought it was better I never knew? And nodded slowly. Yes. I thought it was better for you to live without that influence, without the risks that might come with it. I didn't want you to feel like you had to live up to someone else's expectations, to feel trapped by someone else's plans for your life. He clenched his fists, his mind torn between gratitude for her sacrifice and the frustration of being kept in the dark. But, Anne, I had a right to know, didn't I? To understand where I came from. Anne's face softened, and she reached across the table, placing a hand over his. Lucas, you were everything to me. I would have done anything to keep you safe. My biggest fear was that they wouldn't accept you for who you truly are. I wanted you to be free to live your life without anyone telling you who to be. Lucas looked down, his mind racing with questions. He felt grateful for everything Anne had done, every sacrifice she'd made. But now, he needed more. There was a part of him that had to understand where he came from, no matter the cost. I understand why you did it, he said softly, but I need to know more. I want to talk to him, to learn the truth for myself. Anne hesitated, fear flashing across her face. Lucas, I only wanted what was best for you. Just, be careful. He's from a world that can be hard to navigate. I only hope that he sees you for who you really are, not just a piece of his past. Lucas gave her hand a reassuring squeeze. I know, Aunt Anne. I'll be careful. And no matter what, you'll always be my family. Nothing will ever change that. The DNA results arrived with a finality that seemed to still the room. The printed report lay between William and Lucas, its findings undeniable. Lucas was, indeed, William Parker's biological son. Lucas stared at the words, his thoughts swimming. A feeling he couldn't yet name washed over him. Part excitement, part fear, and something deep and bittersweet he couldn't ignore. He'd spent years imagining who his father might be, only to learn that this person, William, had always been closer than he realized. Now, here was the proof, printed in black and white. William, seated across from him, seemed equally affected. He watched Lucas with a mixture of pride, relief, and perhaps a hint of sorrow. It was as if, with this one confirmation, all the years lost between them weighed heavier. I can hardly believe it, William finally said, his voice quiet, almost reverent. He extended his hand toward Lucas, who took it, feeling a strange but undeniable connection. I've had so many questions my whole life, Lucas admitted, his voice trembling slightly. I never imagined something like this. Catherine, standing nearby with a warm, encouraging look in her eyes, stepped forward, placing a gentle hand on William's shoulder. We're so happy to know you, Lucas, she said. It's strange, in the best way. It feels like we're finally able to welcome a part of our family that was missing. Lucas felt a flood of emotions at her words, both grateful and overwhelmed. He managed a slight nod, wanting to find the right words to respond, but feeling as though they all fell short. Then his gaze shifted, settling on Anne, who stood slightly apart, her hands clasped tightly in front of her, her face a careful mask of calm. She hadn't spoken yet, and Lucas could tell that this moment, seeing him integrated into the Parker family, was not easy for her. Her eyes flicked to William, then back to Lucas, a small shadow of worry darkening her expression. Lucas let go of William's hand, turning fully to Anne. Aunt Anne, he began, his tone resolute. I want you to know that none of this changes what you mean to me. You raised me, you took care of me, and I'll never forget that. You're my family too. I can't leave you. You've been everything to me. Anne's face softened, the tense lines easing slightly, though her eyes remained cautious. Lucas, I know, she said, her voice calm but carrying a hint of vulnerability. And that's why I've always wanted what's best for you, even if it meant keeping things hidden. Catherine seemed to sense the tension, and she quickly stepped forward, her voice gentle but confident. And, she began kindly, you've done more for Lucas than anyone could ask. And as we all figure out this new chapter together, I'd love for you to be part of it. She glanced between Lucas and Anne, as if carefully considering her words. If it would make things easier, we'd love for you to come live with us as well. It would mean the world to us for you to be here, with Lucas and all of us together." And looked visibly taken aback. Her eyes darted between Catherine and William, then finally settled on Lucas. The idea seemed to overwhelm her. She let out a short, uneasy laugh, shaking her head as if trying to process it. "Oh, Catherine, that's very generous of you," she replied, her voice unsteady. "But I never wanted to interfere or disrupt anything in your lives. My place has always been with Lucas." William took a step toward her, his expression warm and sincere. "And," he said softly, "I know this is unexpected. But if you're willing, we want to thank you for all that you've done by making a place for you with us. It's the least we can do for someone who's given so much to my son." And hesitated, her hands wringing slightly. "But William, Catherine, I never wanted Lucas to feel torn between two worlds. I only ever wanted him to have a stable life. Bringing him here into this world," she paused, gesturing faintly at the grand surroundings, "it wasn't part of the life I'd planned for him." Lucas stepped closer, sensing the conflict his aunt was grappling with. "Aunt Anne," he said gently, "it's okay. You've always done what's best for me, and I can't thank you enough for that. But maybe this is a chance for us to have the family we didn't know was out there. You don't have to choose between being a part of my life and letting me know this part of my history. I want us all to be together." Anne's face softened, and a tear glistened in her eye, though she quickly blinked it away. She looked at Lucas, her expression a mix of love, doubt, and a trace of relief. "Lucas," she said quietly, her voice filled with tenderness, "you've always been like a son to me. I didn't expect all this. It's still so overwhelming. But if this is what you truly want, then I'll trust you." Lucas reached out, clasping her hand in his. "Yes, Aunt Anne. It is. And nothing would mean more to me than for you to be here with us." Catherine stepped forward, smiling reassuringly. "And you wouldn't be disrupting anything. If anything, you'd be making us whole." Her words seemed to resonate, and Anne's shoulders finally relaxed, as though a weight she'd carried alone for years was beginning to lift. After a long pause, Anne nodded, a hesitant but genuine smile forming. "Then yes," she said quietly, her voice gaining strength. "For Lucas's sake, I'll do it. I'll give this a chance." The relief that flooded the room was palpable. Lucas's heart swelled with gratitude, and he hugged her tightly, feeling the strength of their shared bond. William approached, his expression one of profound respect. "Thank you, Anne. I know this isn't easy. I look forward to getting to know you and showing our gratitude for everything you've done for Lucas. You've raised a fine young man." And gave him a small, appreciative nod, her voice gentle. "Thank you, William. I think we all just want what's best for him." A silence fell as they looked at one another, the enormity of the moment settling in. For the first time, Lucas felt like he had a glimpse of what his life could be, one where both the love he'd always known and the family he'd never known could coexist. The path ahead still seemed uncertain, but for the first time in a long while, Lucas felt ready to face it. As Lucas began settling into his new reality with the Parkers, he felt himself growing closer to each member of the family. He was gradually finding his place at their table, in their daily lives, and even in his own mind. His bond with Catherine deepened as she gently encouraged him to pursue his studies, constantly asking about his programming projects and his plans for the future. Sophia, though quieter and reserved, often shared her art with him, slowly opening up as they began to discover the shared intricacies of being siblings. And of course, Ethan followed Lucas like a shadow, his little eyes lighting up with admiration each time Lucas walked into the room. But in the midst of this new family unity, not everyone was pleased with Lucas's arrival. Jonathan Miller, William's longtime business partner, watched the unfolding situation with a growing sense of mistrust. While Jonathan was careful to maintain a cordial face in front of the Parkers, his suspicions toward Lucas only deepened over time. To him, Lucas's sudden appearance felt too convenient, and Jonathan was convinced the young man might have ulterior motives. In the weeks following Lucas's arrival, Jonathan noticed how frequently William would mention Lucas in meetings, even suggesting that his son might one day have a role within the company. The very idea grated on Jonathan, who had spent years working alongside William to build Parker Tech's reputation and success. The possibility of an outsider, especially one with such a modest background, entering the family business felt like an encroachment on the stability Jonathan valued so much. Finally, unable to contain his frustration, Jonathan decided to address his concerns directly with William. They were in the middle of a board meeting, discussing an upcoming project, when Jonathan saw an opening. "William," he said, his tone deceptively casual, "I wanted to bring up a concern. You've spoken often about your newfound son, Lucas, which is quite the revelation. But I have to ask, are you certain about bringing someone so new into your life, and by extension, into the future of this company?" William looked at him, surprised but not defensive. "Jonathan, Lucas is my son. Blood or no, he's family now. I don't see how that should concern the business. I'll keep him out of Parker Tech's affairs until he's ready, but I'd like to give him the chance to learn." Jonathan leaned back in his chair, crossing his arms. "I'm not saying this out of personal interest, William. I'm thinking about the company's future. After all, Parker Tech has a reputation to uphold. We don't know anything about Lucas's life before he arrived. You're risking a lot by trusting someone with a history we haven't vetted." William's gaze hardened slightly, his loyalty to Lucas clear. "I've seen enough of Lucas's character to know he's a good person. He's not here for anything more than a family. He didn't even know I existed until recently." Jonathan chuckled softly, shaking his head. "People can say what they want, but actions speak louder than words. I would urge you to be cautious, William. The last thing we need is for someone, especially a newcomer, to take advantage of your trust." William's voice was calm, but it carried a weight of finality. "I appreciate your concern, Jonathan. But Lucas is my son, and I have no reason to question him. This is my decision, and I stand by it." Realizing he couldn't sway William openly, Jonathan chose a different path. Beneath his carefully neutral expression, he was already plotting a way to get the information he needed. If William wouldn't look into Lucas's past, then he'd do it himself. Jonathan was determined to find something, anything, that would validate his suspicions. After that meeting, Jonathan wasted no time in digging through Lucas's past. He hired a private investigator, instructing them to comb through every detail of Lucas's life, no matter how trivial. It didn't take long before something came up, a buried incident from 2 years earlier. According to the investigator's report, Lucas had been accused of theft at a small electronics store where he'd worked part-time. The charges had ultimately been dropped, as there wasn't enough evidence, but the accusation had left a stain on Lucas's record. Jonathan smirked as he read the report. Here was the leverage he needed. It didn't take long for Jonathan to put his plan into action. With the report in hand, he carefully orchestrated a smear campaign aimed at discrediting Lucas and shaking William's confidence. Jonathan knew precisely where to plant the story, choosing media outlets that would sensationalize the allegations of theft against Lucas. He painted the incident as if it were an established fact, omitting the details that the case had been dropped and that no evidence had ever supported the claim. Within days, tabloids ran headlines implying that William Parker's newly discovered son had a criminal background. The news spread quickly, casting a cloud of suspicion over Lucas, and by extension, over William's judgment. Board members and shareholders began raising questions about the future of Parker Tech, their whispers turning into doubts as the rumors fueled public distrust. Jonathan took advantage of every opportunity to remind others that Lucas's past could spell disaster for the company's reputation, all while feigning concern for William's family interests. It was at a meeting with the shareholders when Jonathan made his boldest move yet. As they gathered to discuss an upcoming project, he cleared his throat, the look on his face grim and sympathetic. "Ladies and gentlemen," Jonathan began, projecting his voice so that everyone present turned their attention to him, "it's come to my attention that we may be facing a critical reputational threat. While I don't mean to interfere with William's personal life, I feel I'd be negligent not to address the risks posed by recent developments." William frowned, already sensing where this was heading. "Jonathan, I don't see how my family matters are relevant to this meeting," he said, his voice cool but controlled. "With all due respect, William," Jonathan continued, glancing around the room to gauge the audience's reaction, "when the character of someone close to the executive team becomes a potential liability, it does concern us all. We've all seen the recent reports regarding Lucas's alleged past." He paused for effect. "I think we owe it to Parker Tech's reputation to address these concerns openly." The room went silent. Lucas, who was seated beside William, felt his stomach twist. He looked down, a flush of humiliation rising to his face as murmurs began to ripple through the group. It was as if his entire life, his character, was being publicly dissected and laid bare. William straightened in his seat, his gaze never leaving Jonathan. "Let's clarify a few things," he said, his tone steely. First, the accusations against Lucas were unsubstantiated and dismissed. Second, I trust my son implicitly. Parker Tech standards are not under threat because of baseless gossip. But Jonathan didn't back down, his voice taking on a concerned tone that veiled his true intentions. I understand that this is a difficult situation, William. But as your business partner, I have to ensure that we consider all risks. And the risk here is significant. Lucas's chest tightened. He felt every eye on him, judgmental and cold. Later that evening, as he walked through the house in silence, his mind weighed down by Jonathan's accusations and the damage they had caused, he couldn't shake the sense of shame that clung to him. The last thing he wanted was to bring trouble to William and the family that had taken him in. That night, he went to William's study, knocking quietly before stepping inside. William looked up, his face tired but warm. "Lucas," he said, gesturing for him to come in. "What's on your mind?" Lucas hesitated, his voice wavering. I think it might be better if I leave." William's expression turned stern. "Leave? Why on earth would you think that?" Lucas looked down, struggling to find the right words. "I can see what this is doing to the company and to you. The board, the shareholders, everyone's talking. Maybe it would be easier if I wasn't here. I don't want to cause you more problems." William stood up, crossing the room until he was face to face with Lucas. "Listen to me, Lucas. You're my son. That's not going to change, and neither is my decision to stand by you." His tone softened as he placed a hand on Lucas's shoulder. "You've done nothing wrong. This is Jonathan's doing, not yours. And we're not going to let him drive you away over something that never even happened." Lucas's shoulders slumped as he looked away, guilt and frustration still gnawing at him. "But Dad," he said quietly, surprised by how naturally the words slipped out, "he's turning everyone against me. Against us." William's eyes softened, catching the slip, but he didn't call attention to it. Instead, he nodded thoughtfully. "Then we'll fight this. Together. But we're going to do it the right way." As he left the study, Lucas's mind raced. He knew they needed to prove Jonathan's actions to the board before things could spiral further. He decided to reach out to Michael, Sophia's best friend and someone who had a knack for digging up information others couldn't find. Michael was more than willing to help. A few nights later, Michael and Lucas huddled around Lucas's laptop, scanning through files and records that Michael had managed to uncover. They found evidence of Jonathan's shady dealings with media contacts, his bribes to local journalists to publish stories without verifying sources, and incriminating messages showing how he twisted the narrative around Lucas's past. "This is it," Michael said, his eyes gleaming with excitement. "This is everything we need to expose him." With the evidence in hand, Lucas brought it to William. Together, they assembled a file that would reveal Jonathan's tactics and deceitful actions to the board. When they finally presented it, the truth spoke louder than any of Jonathan's previous accusations. The board members sat in stunned silence as William revealed the evidence of Jonathan's betrayal. "Jonathan was willing to go this far to harm my son's reputation," William concluded, his voice firm and unwavering. "That's not just a breach of trust in this family, it's a breach of trust in this company." Effective immediately, Jonathan Miller is removed from his position, and further legal action will be pursued. The board voted unanimously to remove Jonathan, who, stunned by the turn of events, was escorted from the premises, his face pale and shaken. As he left, William looked over at Lucas with a proud smile, knowing they had faced and conquered their first threat together as father and son. With Jonathan finally gone and his name cleared, Lucas felt a deep sense of relief, like a burden he hadn't fully realized he was carrying had finally been lifted. He looked around the Parker home, his home now, and felt a powerful wave of gratitude. It was surreal, having a family who not only stood by him but fought for him, willing to protect him even when things got hard. William's unwavering support had shown him what true family looked like, and Catherine's kindness had created a sense of safety he hadn't experienced before. The night after Jonathan's dismissal, they all gathered for dinner, a celebratory meal that had a warm and relaxed air. Ethan was practically bouncing in his seat, looking up at Lucas with bright eyes, always eager for his attention. Sophia, usually reserved, even looked up from her sketchbook to join in the conversation. They laughed, talked about everything and nothing, and for the first time, Lucas felt like he belonged in a way that went beyond a temporary feeling. This was his family now. After dinner, William pulled Lucas aside, leading him to the study where they had shared countless heart-to-heart conversations since meeting. William motioned for him to sit, then leaned against the desk, his expression thoughtful. "Lucas," he began, his tone both serious and affectionate, "you've been through a lot since you came into our lives. I know it hasn't been easy, especially with the challenges Jonathan threw your way. But I want you to know, without a doubt, that we're so proud of you. I'm proud of you." Lucas met his father's eyes, feeling a swell of emotion. "Thank you, William. I don't think I can put into words what all of this has meant to me. I'm still getting used to the idea of being part of something like this. Part of something real." William's face softened, his hand reaching out to rest on Lucas's shoulder. "It's real, Lucas. And it will always be real. This family is yours as much as it's ours." He smiled, his voice turning a bit lighter. "And on that note, I hear you're about to start classes soon." Lucas nodded, a mixture of excitement and nervousness flashing across his face. "Yeah, I finally enrolled in the programming course. It feels incredible, like I'm actually moving towards something I've always wanted. And I couldn't have done it without you, without the family." "Your hard work got you here, Lucas," William reminded him. "We just gave you a little nudge. But I have a feeling you're going to do great things." In the weeks that followed, Lucas threw himself into his studies, learning everything he could about programming. He loved the challenge, the way it stretched his mind, the thrill of finally understanding concepts he'd only ever dreamed of learning. And each night, he would come home to the Parkers, to Ethan's boundless enthusiasm, to Sophia's quiet support, and to Catherine's warm encouragement. And too, was part of this newfound stability. Though she initially seemed wary of her new surroundings, she quickly found her own place within the family, and her presence became an essential part of Lucas's life. He would often find her in the kitchen with Catherine, the two of them deep in conversation, or in the living room with Ethan, helping him with his homework. Her unconditional love, which had anchored him all his life, continued to be his constant, even as he stepped into this new chapter. One evening, as he sat on the porch reflecting on how much his life had changed, Sophia came out, sketchbook in hand, and sat beside him. They sat in comfortable silence for a while, the bond between them now one of shared experiences and quiet understanding. "Pretty crazy, who?" Sophia said finally, a faint smile on her lips. Lucas chuckled. "Yeah. A year ago, I was delivering pizzas, dreaming of someday studying programming. Now, everything's different." Sophia glanced at him thoughtfully. "You belong here, you know. I'm glad you're part of the family." Lucas looked at her, surprised by the rare openness in her voice. "Thanks, Sophia. I feel like I do. More than I ever thought I would." A few days later, as Lucas continued his studies and found a rhythm between school and home, William called him into the office at Parker Tech. Lucas entered, looking around the familiar, expansive space where William had spent so much of his life building his empire. William gestured for Lucas to sit. "I wanted to talk to you about something," he said, an unmistakable pride in his voice. "Parker Tech is opening up a summer internship program in a few months, one focused on tech innovation. I think you'd be an excellent fit for it." Lucas's eyes widened. "Are you serious? You'd trust me with that?" "Lucas, you've proven time and again that you're more than capable. And besides," he added with a smile, "it would give us more time together, working side by side. No pressure, though. If it's not something you're ready for, I understand." Lucas grinned, already feeling the excitement building. "I'd love to, William. It would be an honor. And I think I'm ready." That evening, he told Anne about the internship, and she embraced him tightly, her pride evident. "You've always had it in you, Lucas. You just needed the right doors to open." The path before him felt brighter, each step forward a chance to fulfill the dreams he'd once held so close, dreams that had felt like mere fantasies. In quiet moments, he often thought back to the night he found Ethan in the park, realizing just how much that single act of kindness had changed everything. That moment had opened a door to a family, to a life he never imagined was possible. Looking around at the people who had become his true family, William, Catherine, Sophia, Ethan, and his beloved aunt Anne, Lucas understood that this was just the beginning. He was ready for whatever lay ahead, knowing he would face it with a family who believed in him. His journey had only just begun.
If you've made it this far, then subscribe to the channel and leave a comment.